AskReddit by Ella Grigsby. Teachers of Reddit, what's the saddest thing a student has ever said to you? Handed me a note that said "Thus is going to cause problems, but my dad said he was going to shoot me with his gun." We had already made a child abuse report 2 days prior because he had marks on his neck from his dad choking him. I spent a very late night that day keeping him company at the Children's Services office while they found a foster placement for him. Thank you for standing with him. Student of mine has a mom diagnosed with leukemia. Not doing good. He's pretty anxious, she's in the hospital a lot. Was sitting with him working on some math. He looks me straight in the eye, tears in his, and says, "I don't want my mom to die." He's in 2nd grade. Ugh, this one hits me so close to home. It wasn't my mom. It was my grandpa. My dad had passed away when I was a baby and my papa took on that fatherly role. He did everything with me and taught me what he could in the short time we had together. I was also in the 2nd grade when he went to the hospital and never came home. 30+ years later it still hurts. I had a kindergarten student ask me if he could take a nap mat home with him, so he could sleep on it instead of the floor with the roaches. Where I live, if you are going to be a resource parent aka foster parent, one of the requirements is that you have a lockable container for meds in the fridge before you can be licensed. It's because they know so many kids come with ear issues from roaches crawling in and out of them, and that med has to be refrigerated. It's such an issue they don't want to license and have anyone take a placement without that refrigerated lockable med bag. Not a teacher, but I did read the teacher's notes in my mom's 1st grade progress report. The teacher described how my mom was a sweet and curious student, but that she required a bit too much love, affection, positive reinforcement, and gentle physical interaction like hugs. What this teacher didn't know is that my mother was reaching out to her because of her horribly abusive home life. It makes me so sad to think that my dear mother so badly just wanted someone to love her and care for her to offset the horror of her home life. I found my kindergarten progress report. The teacher had written, "If she fails at a task, she cries. Because at home, if I failed at or didn't understand something, my abusive alcoholic father would bellow at me how stupid and useless I was." I once told a student that I was proud of her, and detailed a few reasons why. She broke into tears. When I asked her if she was okay, she said, "No adult has ever spoken to me like that before." She was about to graduate HS in a matter of weeks. Just super depressing. What you said, and probably your entire attitude, probably meant a lot to that girl going forward. I had a parent-teacher conference in 8th-9th grade and I don't remember the exact context, but I remember so clearly how my teacher looked at my mum with this almost disgusted look on her face and told her that no, she actually thought I was doing a really great job there. And it meant a lot to have someone who believed like that. Student teaching. Talking to a kid about after-school plans. Kid said he was going to the park to play basketball because he couldn't go home until dark because his mom was a prostitute. Just matter of fact, like he was telling me she was a dentist or a chef. I had one during student teaching too. Had one of my students tell me their dad slaps them in the face. They weren't even trying to tell me that specifically, it was just a part of a story they were telling me. It didn't faze them at all, they thought it was normal. Horrible. I won this iPad at church. Can you keep it safe, cause my mom would just start selling that too if she found it at home. Learned mom was taking money to allow men to saw this student. Still in contact with the student over a decade later and she's doing well, but Jesus. Thank you for caring about that child and keeping contact. I'm sure you had a great impact on helping her get out of that horrible household. Gave them a writing prompt. Would you eat a bowl of worms for $1? Why or why not? Silly stuff can be a good way to get them going. Kid comes back with, paraphrasing, "Yes, definitely. The worms wouldn't be that bad. I'd probably just be sick for a few days. I'd be able to help my family with rent and electricity bills and help my cousins get out from the war in Sudan. Damn, kid. Sounds like a Tifu post, damn. My wife is a teacher. Saddest thing she told me was a druggy mother who would bite her 4-year-old son. The child actually tried justifying his mom's actions by saying it was an accident and she didn't mean it. My wife notified the authorities and state. She was arrested and his aunt, a very good woman, took him and he's doing great now. Wish my local authorities cared that much. My younger stepson came back from his bio mom's house with a nasty bite mark shaped bruise, which was then inspected and documented by a doctor who said it looked like abuse. When questioned, the poor kid called the actions that caused the bruise playing because that's what his mom called it. CPS would just drop by to tell her through the cracked window, because she refused to open the door, not to do that again. Kept telling penniless people to hire lawyers and fight it out in court. Turns out that doesn't work when the biter's parents have lawyer money and the judge is too lazy to read a stack of nearly 100 CPS reports, starting with concerned daycare workers reporting large bruises on a toddler. Most of these are really sad and they're about poverty. I used to have a private tutoring student, about 7-8 years old, who was mega rich and he was super excited one day. I asked him why and he told me he was going to see his dad. I asked him how often he saw his dad and he said his dad comes home for a night once every 2-3 months. The father was a successful man who was presumably busy with work, but also had a string of ex-wives and mistresses, all of whom had children by him. He paid for their homes and lives, so they never wanted for material items, but the kids went without a father, while knowing they had a father out there. He just didn't deem them important enough to spend time with. I work at a preschool for wealthy families, many of whom employ full-time nannies in addition to enrolling their children in full-time preschool. The parents treat them like possessions, or have this attitude like I'll hang out with them once we can drink together. It's hurtful, because they're usually bright, beautiful children who just want to be loved. I used to teach at an elementary school in San Bernardino, CA. 3 years as a math intervention teacher, pulling small groups. After school, I had a classic video game club. Basically ensured some of my at-risk kids could stick around and not have to worry about the crap that goes on around their neighborhoods. Anyway, I incentivized them to have a pizza party if they did their homework. Most of it is on Google Classroom, so they could do it in the club. And during the party, I noticed one of my students basically just, hoarding slices. I got more than I needed for 6 elementary school kids. So I asked him why he wasn't eating and he just said, I can share this with my brother, we don't always get to eat after school. Needless to say, I started stuffing his bag with food snacks every day. That first night though, I cried over that. He is a good kid and you'll see pro. I applaud you. I live right next to San Bernardino and it's not the best safest areas. Especially when the air base shut down followed by the steel factory. It seems like year after year San Bernardino falls a little further into the cracks. Those kids in that district need someone to remind them that they are not forgotten and they can be something. Deleted. She probably did like you and chose you for a reason. But you're not gonna be in a good mood when your mom is trafficking you. JFC this world. My dad doesn't care about me, he only cares about his phone. This was said to me by a swimmer I was coaching a while back because their parent was glued to their phone. No matter how much they yelled for them to watch, they ignored them. Parents, please pay attention to your kids during their sports and extracurriculars. Gosh, this cracked open some feelings. My mom was so wrapped up in herself that she didn't come to my championship little league game when I was 12. I don't remember the reason. Anyway, I MVP'd the crap out of that game. I stole something like 9 bases, batted in multiple runs, dominated the outfield catching multiple outs and even stealing a homer run off the fence. The cherry on top was batting in the final run that won the game. My coach left it up to the team to vote who got the game ball. They gave it to me. When I got home I was excited to tell my mom about it and started by showing her the ball. She said that was nice of them, then asked me to hand her a Coke and went back to watching her show. Mother was dying of breast cancer. All she wanted to do was make it to her son's graduation. She didn't make it. That's such a tough age for a young man to lose his mother. I taught middle school. There was a boy who was picked on and bullied because he smelled of urine. He was very quiet. One day after lunch, and a bad day for him. He mentioned it in passing almost, he couldn't help it. His younger brother wets the bed. That was heartbreaking. When I taught overseas, a student asked me how to cope with having no friends or family around. I was curious and we talked about making new friends, adjusting to new environments, etc. And he shared that his parents sent him to that school because it was far away and had a dorm and they were rarely in touch. Parents just paid tuition and sent living expenses monthly. He had a hard time fitting in. I believe he was on the spectrum, but the country I taught in doesn't really believe in spec ed, and had no friends. It broke my heart. Also an overseas teacher that taught at a boarding school. Lots of stories like that. Parents with money that basically don't want to deal with raising their kid. I had a student who was put on independent studies with less than 4 weeks to graduation, and he was a senior. Why? Because he was home when his older brother came home and some sort of mental breakdown and attacked their mother and then killed himself. After a few days on life support, the mother died. By the time he'd been assigned to me, most of the shock had worn off, and he was still trying to figure things out. Because he was still 17, our principal became guardian ad litem, including a middle school sibling and a toddler. He'd be turning 18 in a few weeks and was willing to be guardian for the siblings. Things had started to stabilize, until one morning about 2 weeks after the funeral, when long-lost relatives of the mother showed up from across the country and took custody of the toddler. Like just showed up one night and took the toddler. He was an absolute mess in my office and I. Why did they make me live? Spoken by a disabled student who had barely survived birth but had been saved but endured many hardships. It was so hard to hear and to acknowledge the absolute anguish of this young person. Edit. After reading the comments, I would like to clarify that when the student referred to they meant the medical system and medical professionals. I cannot discuss details. Truly heartbreaking. A student disappeared for a few weeks. I found out later she tried to kill herself. Her mother's boyfriend had been raping her every night for years. She never came back to school. Wow, what a pose the mother's boyfriend was. You ever hear what happened to him? Deleted. That's enough internet for the month. I wish I hadn't read this. This is horrific. I teach a small group of teens English, and one was getting really upset about their writing not being good enough. I told him that it'll get better as he gets older if he keeps trying. But I won't get older. Why not? Mum says I will always be a useless child. Broke my heart. The teens I teach have quite high functioning autism, so they know that they are different, and they know that they can't do anything to change it, and then they have parents that say shit like that. This is extremely sad. Wish he was fortunate enough to at least have better parents. I taught a mental health program for 4 years. I heard too many stories of abuse, overdoses, neglect, suicide attempts, and sexual assault. One of the saddest was learning about a student whose parent locked them in a cupboard when they were a toddler 4 hours at a time while the parent went out and partied. I don't know why the other kids think I'm not normal. It's not like my parents tried to kill me or anything. The kid was in the foster system because her parents had, in fact, tried to kill her when she was younger, under 5. The trauma has messed up her brain so much that she's now 13 and has bounced between so many homes that we lost count, and, as a result, she'd also been in so many schools that making friends, even without her traumatic past, would be difficult. We had a psychological assessment done on her and the assessment suggested that she mentally hasn't developed past a 4-year-old, meaning her trauma essentially stopped her brain from developing. The other kids hated her because she had no clue how to interact with them age appropriately, but she is so desperate for validation that she would do anything for anyone who would recognize her. Unfortunately, she had many classmates who would try to blackmail, exploit or extort her to get what they wanted, and then ditch her. She moved on to a new home a few months ago and I have no clue how she'll function in adulthood. I'm fairly certain she'll be a teen mom in a few years because someone will give her some validation in exchange for sex and then leave her out to dry with a baby she cannot raise, and no family to support her in trying to get child support from the deadbeat. Not a teacher, but my wife is. She was working at a school with a lot of kids from the res. One sweet little girl was always asking to go home with her. The kid was maybe 8-9. Wife got a transfer, later found out the kid was a victim of SAR. Wife said she was smart and had lots of potential. Kid kept getting on the bus till 13 yo and never turned up again. Prob affects me more than my wife tbh. I've seen this type of thing firsthand, horrifying. All staff knows what the end result will be but no one can really do anything about it. Calling social services generally doesn't fix this type of issue, sadly. I worked as a preschool teacher. One of my students struggled with behaviors. One day after an outburst, he curled up in my arms crying and told me that he was a bad boy. I explained that he was a great kid but sometimes doesn't make the best choices. He looked up at me and said, "I just want someone to love me."